How the LGBTQ movement is helping the growth and evolution of the human species and our eternal souls. A Spiritual Perspective, Part 3 of 6. Brainwashing used by organized religion to the detriment of humanity. Now, please hear me, and hear me well, when I say that this is not meant to offend anyone or convince anyone of anything. Rather, this is my perception of a human-designed and therefore flawed system that is no longer functioning for the benefit of humanity as a whole. Rather, it is a system that is exclusionary, controlling, and conditional, all things that Source is not. Source, God, Allah, Yahweh, or whatever other label you would like to call this energetic force behind everything in existence, is supposed to be unconditional, pure love and light. So right from the outset we have a conflict. Organized religion wants you to follow specific conditions in order to earn the unconditional love you already receive in every moment and for all eternity that you're just not tapped into or connected to within you, which is why you feel miserable so often and it feels like God abandons you when you need Him most. Unconditional love doesn't have to be earned, it just is. It's because this system of organized religion has one very important thing wrong. It teaches us that God is outside of us rather than within us. It teaches us that God is angry, vengeful, and controlling, which makes us fear Him, and He would much rather we love Him. It teaches us to focus on something outside of ourselves to make our decisions for us so that we don't have to take responsibility for our own lives. Using God, people can justify just about anything. As a matter of fact, history reveals that religion has been used to justify genocide, and harming anyone through any of these tactics is not love, and therefore does not align with source energy and does not represent God. Love and fear cannot exist within the same being or entity simultaneously. So someone cannot be loving while utilizing forceful or dictatorial methods to control someone else. If someone is treating you in a way that seems controlling or tweaks you in a weird way that makes you kind of say, okay, and leaves you confused about the relationship, then there's a good chance that this person is still stuck in the fear state of consciousness and doesn't realize what they're doing. The most alarming aspect of this to me is fog. Fog stands for fear, obligation, and guilt. This is the same emotional manipulation tactic used by covert and overt narcissists to keep their victims in line and following the status quo, not asking questions. This is also the same manipulative tactic used by cult leaders and interrogators at POW camps. Fear. In my experience, threats of going to hell or of God striking you down were very prominent. So if we do anything wrong ever, we are told we have to face an eternal consequence of pain and suffering. Well, from my vantage point, I see a lot of pain and suffering here on Earth already, so maybe we are already in hell, and now it's time to work our way out of it by raising our energetic frequencies. Maybe hell is just a different label for another dimension of consciousness. Have you noticed how great we humans are at making ourselves and each other miserable? Coupled with the law of attraction, it makes perfect sense that subjecting yourself to this type of fear conditioning would create more misery than it alleviates. Obligation. Jesus suffered and died on the cross for your sins, so you better spend the rest of eternity making up for that and paying Him back, right? God created you and you betrayed His trust by eating of the fruit in the garden, so you're going to spend the rest of eternity making up for it because that's what religion says. Again, that sounds pretty conditional to me. I don't believe that is a divine attitude at all, so I will choose to believe that Source is unconditional, and that all of this conditional bullshit either originates from humans or from dark entities trying to enslave humanity. Just like you don't owe your parents anything for raising you, we don't owe Source anything because we are pieces of Source. If anything, we each owe ourselves the unconditional love that is readily and abundantly available to us from within and allows us to feel our connection to Source. Guilt. Now let's place guilt into our hearts for our sins. A priest said this during his homily one Sunday when I was about 16, and that was the moment I lost my desire to participate in organized religion. If I'm a decent human being, I will already feel an appropriate amount of guilt after doing something that ignites a guilt feeling. If I beat myself up over it excessively and prolong this guilt, it creates an energetic burden on my soul that is extremely difficult to shake. This can lead to soul fragmentation, a process by which we are unable to feel complete or whole as we are due to a splintering of our energetic core, a very common consequence of spiritual abuse, which organized religions and their followers tend to commit inadvertently, without being aware of it happening, just by following the rules of their broken religious system, without consciously and critically considering what is really happening. There are many commonalities between what I experienced and what people experience in a cult environment, so I'd like to go over some of the 6 aspects of a cult that have parallels within this particular religion according to my experiences and perception. Control of the environment. Place of worship. The origin of the word cult means worship. Overall mood or vibe, dress code, silence, somberness, etc. These are some aspects of environmental control. A system of rewards and punishments. If you go to confession and do penance for your sins, you may keep receiving the Eucharist or body of Christ. If you're bad, you go to hell, or we may make an example out of you to keep the rest of the flock in line. Creating a sense of powerlessness, fear, and dependency. The deity has all the power. You are merely a servant, and beware the wrath of God. He is a vengeful God, according to some scriptures, so you'd better watch out. Not only does this create a sense that we are unable to take control of our own lives because fear of making a mistake can be paralyzing, and this is the eternal soul we're talking about, making this fear very real and very frightening to mere humans. But it also creates a sense that we have no say in what happens to us in our lives because we're waiting on God to make things happen. I don't care what anybody tells you, this is not a healthy way to exist as a human. Again, the problem is that God is said to be outside of us, not a part of us within. Reforming the followers' behavior and attitudes. Dictating what to wear, how to speak, what to do, what not to do, whom to associate with, and whom to ostracize and exclude or use as a scapegoat or example to keep everyone else in line. None of this is loving. All of it is controlling and fearful. All within a closed system of logic. Their truth is the only truth, period, and everyone else is going to hell because they are wrong. Many decide to go on mission trips and witness to other people, and sometimes this is done in a much more loving way than other times. For the source referenced here, please click the link in the description. Because of the fear and control tactics many organizations and systems incorporate in today's world, this is all considered very normal, and those of us who are waking up already tend to be highly sensitive, intuitive, empathic, and at least somewhat connected to Source from within. Once you have connected with Source by going within, you feel your truth rather than adopting someone else's. And this is where you can start stepping into your own power and taking full responsibility for yourself and your spirit, which includes taking responsibility for every life you've ever lived and anything that may have happened within those lives. The final topic I want to cover in this section is sex shaming, because that ties this whole article back to the LGBTQ movement. Organized religions are excellent at doing this, and this shame shedding, alarmingly this is also a trait of people on the NPD spectrum, is conditioned into the organization's members, who then condition it into their children via the same fear and control tactics, because they come to believe that this is the best way to show love, because the example of this is the Bible, the church, and God. Although it isn't the best way to show love, the physical world and all of the constructs we have created as human beings convinces many of us that unconditional love isn't real, doesn't exist, and that life is supposed to be a struggle and an emotional roller coaster. Of course it is when you're following the example of a deity who comes across as controlling and vengeful rather than loving. If he doesn't want us to be vengeful, then why is he being such a hypocrite about it? Just a thought. Sex was by far the most taboo topic in my household growing up, and I essentially ended up having to go and find out what I wanted to know on my own, because the only talk I ever got was, "Sex is bad, don't do it." Same with anything else that was uncomfortable. They chose not to sit down and have common educated conversations with me or offer me information and knowledge that would educate me. Rather, they told me what to do and what not to do, and then shamed me for wanting the experience, shamed me for the way I dressed. I was considered goth in high school, but always dressed pretty conservatively regardless because I was self-conscious about my weight. And shamed me for my friendships and relationships after the slightest indication that my friends or boyfriends weren't up to their impossible standards of perfection. They also shamed me for wanting a social life and needing affection, oftentimes telling me or each other, "She's like a bitch in heat." Sex shaming. Of course, I also was shamed for needing emotional support, but that's going full circle back to how so many HSPs or empaths have been raised. Meanwhile, all I wanted was to feel loved, accepted, and understood, especially by my family. I silently endured emotional and spiritual abuse throughout my life until recently due to the emotional stuntedness of the family I was born into. This doesn't make them bad people. It simply means that they are still asleep, still trapped in the physical experience as if it's the only one in existence, despite claiming to believe in a soul and an afterlife, and still unaware and unconscious of the ripple effect they are sending out into the universe with each toxic action or word. Because of the sheer accumulation of dark or negative emotional energies, it causes a great deal of inner turmoil when one is confronted with the idea of taking responsibility for the things one has said or done to hurt another. And yes, taking inner responsibility can be painful and even shocking, especially to the ego, which shrinks a little bit every time you swallow your pride and do the right thing no matter how challenging. Unfortunately, you cannot expect unconscious or unawakened people to take this level of responsibility, which is not anchored in the physical, by the way. I'm not referring to being responsible for your own basic needs and shelter. I'm referring to taking responsibility for everything beneath the surface, beginning with emotions and how your behavior may affect others, because we are all connected. Those who still deny, shift blame, and shrink away from taking this level of responsibility are not your responsibility or anything you need to be concerned with, though. You cannot expect, force, or coerce someone outside of yourself to take responsibility for their own actions, words, or other unforeseen consequences of underlying energetic or emotional activity that they don't understand from their level of consciousness. For your own sanity, if you're in a situation like this, I highly recommend getting to a point where you simply do not care what other people think of you, say about you, etc., especially those who are toxic to you but claim to care about you. Toxicity and abuse happen in cycles, so of course they will then become nice and sweet and apologetic, only to turn on you again after an amount of time, or when you do something they don't agree with, or that might make them look bad or threaten their authority or sense of being infallible. Remember that abuse is abuse, period. One person making another suffer, ages and relationships don't matter, one human to another, period, on any level, especially intentionally, is abusive. I remember feeling very confused about why emotions felt so big but weren't allowed to be spoken about, and extremely discouraged from even being felt. Why wasn't I supposed to feel things? You can imagine how counterintuitive and oppressive this would feel to an innocent child. Needless to say, I am definitely not in the minority with this experience, and have remained steadfast in my conviction that my children's feelings matter, and I will help guide them through whatever they are going through, while also allowing them to be 100% themselves and explore their options so that they can make an informed decision about who they are and who they want to be in their physical experience. I accept my children for who they are already, and whoever they will grow into as they journey through this life and make new discoveries about themselves. I do not hold any resentment toward my children, like many parents do, especially those on the NPD spectrum or with another psychological or personality disorder. Although I have found some traces of it buried way back in the darkest corners of my own soul. From the beginning of my first pregnancy, though, I made the conscious decision to continue following my passion in life whether I had children or not. I knew that if I gave up on my own work and inspiration, I would end up growing resentful toward my children, and this is not good because it plays out in unconscious and subconscious ways and manifests in ill treatment toward your children, often in the forms of emotional abuse, manipulation tactics, control, force, neglect, or even sexual and physical abuse. And whether you realize it fully or not, abuse is hiding right under our noses every single day. When a parent tells their child, "You should be ashamed of yourself," or "I know you better than you know yourself," or "I know what's best for you," this creates a feeling of instability within that child and encourages a development of poor self-esteem, a lack of self-love, and zero trust in their own judgment or ability to make decisions. "You should be ashamed of yourself" is the main vibe of this particular organized religion, especially when it comes to sex. How dare you have a desire for something so natural, beautiful, expressive, and sacred? Shame on you. I say fuck that. This does not establish a healthy sense of sexuality, and worse, it distorts our idea of what healthy boundaries look like. It creates an inability to say no when someone is being further abused or coerced into sexual activities that they may not actually want to participate in because they're so used to someone outside of them dictating every decision they should make, as well as doling out consequences that have zero relevance in the real world, so to speak, or to what you actually did, quote-unquote, wrong. It also creates a sense of shame just for being human and having human desires, which translates into a constant feeling of having a guilty conscience, which is then used to further manipulate and control you via your emotions, because then you get into trouble for things you didn't even do just by looking guilty. These controlling, fear-based tactics are not limited to organized religion either by any means. These tactics are also employed in corporations and other businesses, families, classrooms, and other social groups. The layers of this type of fear-based existence permeate everything, which is why it is up to those of us who are seeing this now to help shed light onto these tough but important issues and bring a new perspective to the forefront, one that is more open and less fearful, loving and not controlling. Now, I'm not writing about organized religion to claim that they are a cult, period. I think that we can all agree life is not as black and white as that. However, I can tell you from my experiences that I constantly and consistently felt judged, shamed just for feeling things or asking questions, guilt-tripped for disagreeing with anything, and essentially energetically and emotionally beaten into submission. This has caused a great deal of suffering and issues for me due to the brainwashing and conditioning, all of which I am currently in the process of working through and releasing for my own sake. Writing these types of articles helps me with this, and I hope that my experience is able to also help you in this process. And even though the problems were created from an external source to begin with, they must be healed from within. The person who hurt you may never admit it or even be brought to any kind of justice, which isn't an excuse for the behavior, but it does mean that you cannot expect a thing from them and will heal much more quickly if you focus on healing from within and do not depend on them for your progress, because this keeps your power in their hands. Now, if I was treated this way for whatever reason, which has nothing to do with me or anything about me, but everything to do with the closed-mindedness and judgment of other people, I can only imagine the suffering and turmoil someone who identifies as LGBTQ may have to endure just to be who they are and feel accepted as such. Well, I am here to let you know that all of that fear, control, guilt, and other manipulations and coercive tactics are not loving. And you deserve unconditional love just like the rest of us do. We are humans. Being human comes with gathering experiences and learning from them. When we discover something about ourselves that we may not have known before, and we want to explore further or embrace that aspect of ourselves, there is nothing more damaging than people who claim to care about you, turning away from you because you are choosing a different path than they would choose for you. The only people who will ever have an issue with you being yourself are those who wish to control you. And again, control is based in fear, and fear and love cannot exist simultaneously within the same being. This is the dimension of consciousness we each must choose for ourselves. As far as I can tell, one human being loving another, consenting of course, for any of you who are tempted to bring up child predators as an argument, is nothing but beautiful. And who am I to dictate to another human being what is right for them? I do want to touch briefly on the child predator thing because this is a quote-unquote argument that has been presented either to me or in front of me by many Christians and others who are resistant to the evolution of the species and our definition of love. Sexual predators. Whether they are attacking children or adults, men or women, are not in it for love. They are using a distortion of love to justify their abusive behavior, just like any other abuser does. A rapist does not rape a woman because she's dressed provocatively. Rape, as with any and all sexual assault or abuse of any kind, is a method for gaining control and feeling powerful because they know deep down that they are weak. Fear-based intimidation, threats, coercion, and force are not signs of strength, but of cowardice, and none of this is based in love. Unfortunately, even in today's society, and in courtrooms no less, people are continuously and consistently blaming and shaming victims rather than punishing perpetrators. Rather than telling women that their rape was brought on by the way they dressed, aka victim blaming, if these people who are essentially responsible for justice had even the slightest training or knowledge about psychology and how abuse and aggression actually work, I don't believe they would be nearly as quick to blame the victim for her clothing choices or alcohol choices for that matter. I have said before and will say again that I think psychology should be a requirement for those in positions of power who will be making decisions about someone else's life based on individual information where facts are sometimes hard to come by and the gray areas are all that are left. This is the playground of the abuser because they know they can get away with their shit because of this vehement lack of education on the part of commissioners and judges. In my experience, especially with abuse that isn't physical, they have the easy out of saying, "I can't speak to that because I'm not a psychologist." Meanwhile, the victim then has to continue living in a daily nightmare, fearing for their lives because someone with the appropriate power didn't want to get their hands dirty and do the right thing. This has happened to me on multiple occasions with multiple cases, either my own or someone else's who I was there to morally support. No matter what the case might be, it is very obvious that these judges and commissioners not only don't have the experience with abuse themselves, but they also don't have any of the training required to be able to make a solid judgment call on cases like this. It is another broken system. And I don't usually do this while I'm reading an article, but just as a quick aside here, because of this not being able to get help, it severely dampens the amount of people who actually report these things. So even the statistics, as alarming as they are completely false because people are not going in to report things like they would normally because we understand that help is very, very hard to come by. When I was dealing with my situation, I called everyone. I called the domestic violence hotline, I called suicide prevention, I called everybody, and nobody helped me. I literally got sent around in circles, you know? And this has happened to me on more than one occasion, which is why I wrote about it in the first place. So, back to the article. Thank you very much. That was just a quick author's note. What's worse is that rape is a normal and perfectly accepted occurrence in the Bible. Force, control, assault, and manipulation are very much present within the pages of the Bible, and this tells me that it does not, in fact, come from the true source, but that its authors put their own spin on things. Of course, that's just another one of my opinions, but here's an article to give you a broader perspective on this aspect of the Bible. To check this out, please click the link in the description. No one else has all the information about your life but you. No one knows the things that you know in the ways that you know them. Nor does anyone else express themselves the same way. We are all unique, yet connected in one energetic web. However, your level of connectedness depends on your emotional and vibrational state of being, which again brings us back to no one else knows you the way you do. No one else has the same experiences you do, and therefore no one else would make the same choices you do because they are not operating from the same perspective or angle. Again, there is nothing inherently wrong with any decision made from a place of unconditional self-love and building the life that is ideal for you, according to you, not those outside of you who want to make your choices for you based on their limited outside perspective of your life. This includes sexual orientation and your decisions about who you love and what type of love makes you happiest and allows you to thrive and keep growing as a human being. Thank you so much for being here and for continuing to read and or listen and or watch. I appreciate you all. Thanks to the new subscribers as well as the old. And I hope that I see you in the next video, which is coming up soon. Love and light to you, my friends, especially through the tough topics. Thank you so much for watching. No matter where you are on your journey, please take good care of yourself from within on all levels. If you'd like more guidance, please subscribe to my YouTube channel or visit www.innerworkcoaching.life for more content or to apply for one-on-one coaching. With unconditional love and light, I wish you an amazing week and I hope to see you again for my next video. Namaste.